Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder walking tour. Today we're headed to Kirkwood, Missouri. Kirkwood is located in St. Louis County, Missouri, and is an inner ring western suburb of St. Louis. In fact, the city holds the distinction of being the very first planned suburb west of the Mississippi River. The concept for Kirkwood emerged following the St. Louis Fire of 1849 and the subsequent cholera outbreaks. It prompted Hiram W. Leffingwell and Richard Smith Elliott to purchase land 14 miles from downtown St. Louis in 1850. Around that same time, James P. Kirkwood was designing the route for the Missouri Pacific Railroad, which would later intersect with this new community. The city of Kirkwood was officially laid out in 1852 and quickly became one of the first suburban municipalities beyond St. Louis city limits. As the railroad arrived in 1853, the Kirkwood Association began selling lots for development. The area's growth included the establishment of significant landmarks such as Grand Avenue and the planting of Forest Park by Leffingwell. In 1866, Quaint Cemetery was established, becoming one of the historic African American burial grounds in the St. Louis region. Our first stop is the historic Kirkwood Train Station. In 1853, the first Missouri Pacific Railroad depot was erected right here on this site. Real estate speculators hoped to entice travelers to settle in this first planned suburb west of the Mississippi River. This Richardsonian Romanesque-style depot was constructed by Douglas Donovan to replace a previous wooden structure. The building that we see today was constructed in 1893. This stately depot, with its massive stone walls, circular tower, and broad eaves, is still an active station as well as the visitor center for town. We're now heading towards the historic downtown area of Kirkwood, and the first building we see is the Coulter Feed Store building, which was constructed in 1912. An earlier building on this site was destroyed in an 1896 fire that swept much of the downtown area. Joseph Coulter moved his feed store here in 1912 and advertised the business with a large painted sign that since has been restored on the building's front wall. Coulter was a Kirkwood alderman from 1922 to 1925 and a charter member of the Kirkwood Rotary Club. The building is now used as a retail store. The cream-style building that we see in front of us was once the old firehouse for Kirkwood. It was constructed in 1920. Completed by Fred Howell at a cost of about $7,900, this mission-style building housed the first paid fire department in Kirkwood. Right next door, the building with the green trim was once the old post office in Kirkwood. In the early 1900s, home mail delivery started in Kirkwood, and the new street number system was centered at Main Street, now Argonne Drive, and Webster Avenue, which is now Kirkwood Road. From 1932 to 1942, the post office occupied this neoclassical style building. Today, a wood entablature still spans the facade and a triangular wood pediment crowns the roof of the building. In 1932, Drew Weber built this small 12 by 6 cottage-style brick structure, and it served as a gasoline station for many, many years. Its various uses over the years have included not only being a service station, but a cab stand, a garden shop, as well as a seasonal custard stand. Rudolf Heinzelmann opened a bakery on this site in 1875. After a fire in 1899, the present brick structure with the cast iron and wood facade and pressed metal cornice was built. The retail store displays the only cast iron facade left in Kirkwood. If you look kind of just to the left, you also see a vintage Missouri Pacific caboose that was added to this site in the 1980s. The small home that we see in front of us is known as Brook Cottage, and it was built way back in 1880. Although this late Victorian folk cottage was originally a private residence, it has been used for retail or office space for many decades. The open frame entry porch was rebuilt as part of a meticulous restoration of the building. To our right is St. Peter Catholic School, and to our left we'll see St. Peter Catholic Church. The church dates back to this area as far back as 1832. A group of pioneer families received 80 acres of land from the U.S. government to establish a mission church. In August of 1832, the members built their church and school, as well as established a cemetery. In 1853, they sold 5 acres of the land to be used as a right-of-way by the new railroad being built in what would become the city of Kirkwood. To be more centrally located in the growing city, the parish built a new stone church and rectory in 1867 and 1868 on Main Street, which is now Argonne Drive. The old church site is now part of St. Peter's Cemetery. The parish moved their parochial school in 1907 to Argonne Drive. They remodeled the exterior of the church and the school in 1922 and the interior of the church again in 1942. The growing parish built their third and current church that we see today in 1952. The history of Kirkwood Masonic Lodge number 484 reflects the growth and community spirit of the city since its establishment. The lodge, part of the ancient Free and Accepted Masons, was chartered on October the 12th, 1887, during a time of significant development in Kirkwood. Freemasonry itself has deep roots in Missouri, with the first Masonic lodge in the state being established in St. Louis in 1807. By the late 19th century, Kirkwood was a thriving suburb and the need for a local Masonic lodge became apparent. The founding members of Kirkwood Lodge were prominent citizens and community leaders who sought to create a fraternal organization that would foster brotherhood, moral development, as well as charitable activities within the growing community. In 1903, the lodge constructed its own building that we just recently saw here on Clay and Washington Avenues in downtown Kirkwood. We're now walking through a very beautiful residential area here in Kirkwood, and the first home that we see is known as Swan Cottage. William B. Swan, a Union Army veteran, purchased this one-story Greek Revival home from James and Mary Way in 1867. The home's form is a simple rectangular with a cross-gable roof. Swan's four daughters were frequently mentioned in Kirkwood society in the late 1800s, and the cottage, or the original part of the cottage itself, dates back to 1859. The Robertson Craft House was built in 1860. This Federal-style double house has a wrought iron widow's walk as well as 4 chimneys. The bricks were allegedly handmade on the property itself. The Robertsons were one of the earliest owners. In 1934, though, electrical engineer Christopher Craft bought the house and added indoor plumbing as well as electrical wiring. The Kirkwood Christian Science Church has a history that dates back over 100 years and was actually the first Christian Science church formed in St. Louis County when they started on September 30th, 1906. The very first service was held on October 7th, 1906 at the Choral Hall on Bodley Avenue with about 100 people in attendance. Soon, the need for a more permanent home became clear, and in October 1907, the present lot was purchased. Ground was broken on the building that we see today in 1909, and the cornerstone was laid that same year in September. The very first service was held on October the 11th, 1909 in the building. The church was completely paid for on August 4th, 1916, but on account of World War I, the completion of the edifice as was first designed was not completed until the early part of 1924 due to the lack of materials because of World War I. Kirkwood United Methodist Church dates back almost as far as the founding of the city itself. During the nation's Reconstruction period following the Civil War, the city of Kirkwood was being founded. In 1868, Thomas Axtell, John Kennard, and Dr. H.E. Peoples assembled 7 Methodists for a meeting in Armentrout's Hall at Clay and Main Street, now Argonne Drive. After this meeting, the Reverend W.D. Shoemate, I hope I say that right, took charge of 18 charter members to form a new Southern Methodist Church here in Kirkwood. By 1871, the church membership had grown to about 57 parishioners. In 1872, a frame church was erected at Washington and Clay and cost about $8,000. Within 5 years during the Depression of the 1873 to 1879 period, the frame structure was lost due to financial difficulties. Then a plot of ground at Clay and Adams was given by Dr. John Pittman, and a building was constructed in 1877 called Boyle Chapel. The congregation worshiped there until 1885 when it moved back to its previous home. At that time, members grew to about 78 parishioners. In 1894, the chapel building was destroyed by a huge fire, and a new building was dedicated on the same site in 1895. The church was enlarged in 1915, and the building that we see today, was constructed in 1964. First Presbyterian Church was established in 1854 here in Kirkwood. This enduring congregation organized after a committee meeting on September the 24th, 1854 at the home of Henry Singleton. Services were held at Mr. Singleton's home until the number of attendees outgrew that space, after which they moved into a log schoolhouse just across the street from what was called the current church building at the time. By 1856, they had erected a small brick church on the same site on which the present church now sits. The new church faced on Webster Avenue, now Kirkwood Road. It was located in a grove of trees with a white picket fence between it and the street. On October the 25th, 1888, the congregation began construction of a new stone building on the corner of Adams and Kirkwood Road. They held their first service in the new church at the end of June the following year. In 1929, they added a two-story building to the east side to serve as an education building. Called the Norman Tower, it served as the entrance to the building and still stands to this day. A replacement education building made of brick was added in the 1950s. The need for additional space in the sanctuary led to a building program that began in 1954 and culminated at a Christmas Eve service in 1957. Congregants now enjoy the beauty of 13 huge stained glass windows as well as a new organ. In 1980, more renovation led to the removal of the 1888 stone church, and additional restorations and renovations were done in the early 2000s. The Murfelt Douglas house was constructed in 1870. The original front of this white frame Victorian house with the Italianate details once faced East Adams Avenue. The first owner, Charles W. Murfelt, was a secretary of the Missouri State Agriculture Society and nationally known for his writings on gardening, soil treatment, and crop rotation. The property's gardens were used for both scientific experimentation as well as to be entertaining. The second owner, Stephen Douglas, was the principal of Central High School in St. Louis and a founder of the Kirkwood Public Library. In July of 1870, Reverend John R. Downer of the Mission Society of Kansas was visiting here in Kirkwood, Missouri. In the course of the conversation with Dr. Benjamin F. Edwards, they formed the very first Baptist church here in Kirkwood. On Sunday afternoon, July 31st, 1870, 14 members pledged themselves to become a new church. In January of 1871, services moved from the Presbyterian Church just down the street to a hall on Kirkwood Road that was owned by Dr. John Pittman. In 1888, the church was renamed the Wetzel Memorial Baptist Church in honor of Mrs. Mary H. Wetzel of St. Louis, who had given liberally towards the completion and furnishing of the new church building shortly before her death. The building that we see today for the Baptist Church, Kirkwood Baptist Church, was constructed in 1959. The Keith Greensfelder house was built way back in 1850. The home itself was built for David Keith, an original incorporator of First Presbyterian Church of Kirkwood. This Victorian Italianate style house has wood siding beveled to look like stone and wood on the corners. In the 1890s, Clayton Justice of the Peace Joseph P. Greenfelder purchased the house. Greenfelder was known as the Marion Justice and was a founder of Kirkwood Savings Bank. This large home that we see in front of us is the Gill House, and it dates back in construction to about 1858. The Victorian frame home with the really fine-looking Italianate features, open porch, as well as tall windows, was built for local merchant Romanzo Bailey and was purchased in 1864 by George and Ellen Gill. The original 20-acre property was with substantial gardens extended north to current Gill Avenue and reflected early residents' desires to build a more rural setting in this area of Kirkwood. Edward Beecher, a mayor of Kirkwood, owned the home from 1920 to 1964. The Elliott Unitarian Chapel that we see here is very historic. In fact, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The building was originally constructed for Grace Episcopal Church and was constructed in 1859 by architect Robert S. Mitchell in the Gothic Revival style. Patrick McCullough of Kirkwood, formerly Galway, Ireland, worked as a stonemason on the building. In 1961, the building was transferred to Elliott Unitarian Chapel, and the Grace Episcopal congregation moved down to Argonne Street to another building. Our last stop that we're taking on our way back to the Kirkwood Train Depot is a view of the Kirkwood's Farmers Market. This farmers market operates on the weekends and is a fairly old farmers market that's very heavily attended when it's open throughout the season. I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks of Wonder tour here in downtown Kirkwood, Missouri. If you're a resident of Kirkwood, leave a comment on some of the sites that I may have missed, because I often go through this area and would like to take a look at more history of the town. Also, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Take care now. Bye-bye.